You're watching news at Prime. Good to have you with us. Good evening to you if you're just joining. We start with this. President Cyril Ramaphosa is confident that he and his delegation have successfully managed to reset relations with the United States. He says trade talks with America's counterparts have commenced following last week's meeting with US President Donald Trump. Newzroom Afrika's senior politics reporter, Ziyanda Ngcobo, has been keeping an eye on the President's question and answer session in Parliament, and she joins us live from Cape Town tonight. Ziyanda, good evening to you. Perhaps the big takeaway, although this should not have been part of the business of Parliament today, is the chaotic scenes that ended up even disallowing the President to conclude on what he had set out to tell members of Parliament. Let's talk about the EFF. Remember that when they came into this 7th Parliament, there was a commitment that they would be a contributing party, giving views in Parliament and less disruptions. What happened today?
Well, the robust debate that the EFF had promised South Africans going into the 7th administration is clearly not what was on display here in Parliament today. In fact, it was the same disruptive behavior that was displayed in the 6th administration. One got a sense that the EFF had planned to heckle and disrupt the president as one by one they continuously disrupted the House. First, it was to ask about the protectors that were in the House, which, Deputy Speaker Annelie Letreat also conceded, and they were removed from the House. They were the President's protectors. But also on other issues, it actually began with Umpile Mautwe, who went over time by, I think, 46 seconds, and she was insisting on asking why the President did not uphold the Constitution and the chant, kill the Boer, kill the farmer, as was upheld in the Constitutional Court. And so she was the first one to be kicked out of the House. Other members then followed on to ask why she was being kicked out and the nature of the trip that the President undertook to Washington, why then the issue of the protectors came into play. And so absolutely the protectors are not supposed to be in the House, but if I'm going back to your question, certainly not robust but more disruptive, as the President was actually not able to answer all the questions as outlined in the question sheet, including as well the supplementary questions, and the President really also explaining what happened at the White House, that what was displayed on television was completely different to what they experienced behind closed doors. This is what the President said about that.
And there are discussions that are happening in relation to tariffs, in relation to investments, and we believe that we have reset the relationship despite what we could have seen on television. We were able to have a much more meaningful discussion and meeting with President Trump and his representatives during the quiet room where we had lunch together and had meaningful exchanges on a number of issues. And we do believe that the engagement will continue through the G20 process. So that was the main objective of the visit, and we do believe that the United States continuing to play such a big role in the life of our economy, it was necessary and important for us to go and engage with them.
Ziyanda, again, I keep going back to the business of the day of Parliament that completely did not see the light of day. Earlier you said the EFF gave you a sense that coming into this session today, they had set out to heckle the President. What gave you that impression, and did it work out exactly as, I suppose, you have assumed?
Well, I mean, I don't know what the end game was, but I can tell you, just judging, just look at, MP Kaula, even when she was asked to leave the house, instead of, using the door behind her to exit, she walked around quite slowly, went to a door, that was not opened, and then it disrupted the house again. Every time the president stood up, there was a point of order, whether on the online platform or within the House, also rehashing issues that have already been decided upon by the Deputy Speaker, Annelie Lotriet, who kept on saying that if you've got issues, take it to the Programs Committee. I have already made a ruling. And so it was clear that there was a lot of time that was being wasted, just going back to issues. I mean, when the protectors left the House, then there were questions around who were they protecting. Then the answer came that the protectors, the one was for the president, the one was for the deputy president. And so there was just a lot of going around and perambulating around the same issues instead of, once there's been a determination, move on. And you do have other avenues to raise your issues, like the Programs Committee, especially the issue of the protectors, which is an important issue to raise, Xoli. Protectors are not supposed to be in the House. That's a very important issue that they raised. But at the point at which now it has been dealt with, allow the president to continue, because now there was also a sense, and that's what the Deputy Speaker spoke about, that other parliamentarians are now being disrespected and not allowing their own voices, and through their own voices I also mean their constituencies, to be heard in the House through asking questions to the president. So, I mean, a lot of focus coming from the EFF on the trip to Washington, on the issue of Kill the Boer as well, which as well was also dealt with pretty early on when Umphile Maotwe was kicked out of the House.
As we conclude the conversation, Ziyanda, the Deputy Speaker of the House saying that this is a disservice to the people of South Africa, to a point where she intimated that perhaps some stringent steps are going to be taken. The impression that South Africans are left with, as to our earlier point about the EFF giving a commitment that they would behave differently in the 7th Parliament. What is that takeaway today for ordinary South Africans?
Well, I mean, ordinary South Africans can decide for themselves, but there is something to be said about Parliament, which is the legislative arm of the state, not being able to continue the work of the day. I was mentioning earlier that those parliamentarians in that House don't represent themselves. They represent a constituency, and the voices of their constituencies, for some of the parliamentarians whose questions ultimately were not answered, were actually not able to go back to their constituencies and report back. So the disruption in the House is, quite the thing to reflect on, Xoli, given how, there are a lot of issues on the go here, and even sometimes putting issues that aren't necessarily linked with one another in the House. So really, in terms of what is going to be done, that is obviously a decision that will be taken with the Speaker, who would have been monitoring those proceedings as well. She kicked off the proceedings earlier on in the afternoon. But really, that's the point that Annelie Lotriet, the Deputy Speaker, made, that this was a huge disservice. And by the way, Xoli, they could have continued with the session, if, of course, at the indulgence of the president. But you also got a sense that the presiding officers were also quite peeved, to put it in a very blunt manner. And so they just ended the sitting so that they could actually just ensure that perhaps set another time for the president to come and answer questions.
Ziyanda Ngcobo, thank you very much for that update.